Hey there, my name is Sage, and for the last 9 months I've been developing my first game, Riot. Riot is a mech-action roguelike inspired by Armored Core, Risk of Rain, and Borderlands. Basically, imagine a combination of Armored Core 6's moment-to-moment gameplay, Risk of Rain's gameplay loop, and mech parts and weapons generated like the guns in Borderlands. In this video, I'll be going over a bit of what the development of this game has been like so far, but I'll also have a few more details toward the end about what you can expect from the playtest I'm currently working to get out there. If you're liking what you see so far, I'd love it if you'd subscribe to this channel and wishlist the game on Steam so you can keep up with all the updates as they come. Alright, let's get into it. I started developing Riot in May of 2024. I had recently finished 100%ing Armored Core 6, and I kept finding myself scrolling through Steam, hoping that I'd find somebody making a mech game similar to it. That is to say, something with awesome movement, challenging combat, and deep customization. Eventually I had a thought. Why don't I try making it myself? Best case scenario, somebody else announces the game I want to play. Worst case scenario, I create the game and get to play it myself. I'd already had the idea of a mech-action roguelike bouncing around in my head for a bit. The deep customization of mechs just seemed like the perfect match for a game with nearly infinite replayability. So, I got started. Early on, I realized I was in a bit over my head. I was trying to learn how to work in Unreal Engine, how to create animations, how to make 3D models, how to make particle effects, and more. All at once. I knew I needed to slow down and work on one thing at a time, so I decided the first thing I'd do would be create the movement system. I figured there was no point creating this game if I couldn't make the movement feel just as addicting as it did in AC6. I bought a mech asset for a placeholder, and I got to work. Here's the earliest video I have of that movement. You can also see an older version of the booster particle effects. Next up, I decided to start working on animations. I had watched enough videos about game feel at this point to know that selling the movement was a major part of a great feeling movement system. Getting into animations also meant that I had to start thinking about how my mechs would be constructed, at least at a basic level. I ended up going the route of creating several separate skeletons that I'd then hook together. The legs, the torso, the left arm, the right arm, and the head. All of these are animated separately, though the legs are what receive the majority of the animations. The arms mostly use inverse kinematics to aim and fire at enemies, with a couple default positions and animations used for things like melee attacks. The head and torso don't actually animate at all at this point, but theoretically they could. At this point I also started thinking about weapons and created a rudimentary pistol so that I'd have something else to fidget with when testing movement things. I also began to work on the system for the parts. I knew that I wanted parts to be generated so that there could be a ton of possibilities, so I started by making placeholder template parts for a system where each part would be represented by a combination of a few separate models. Next, I implemented the proof of concept for the aiming and target acquisition system, as well as a baseline for weapons capable of firing. After that, I felt myself wanting to really start playing the game, so I implemented some basic enemies, a test level, a better heads-up display for targeting, and missile launchers. At this point, the game was already beginning to feel fun to just kick back and play, so I was super motivated to add more content to it. I implemented the modular weapon system, and I spent a bunch of time tweaking other things to feel better. At this point, I was about 2 months in and felt like it was time to start improving the game's presentation. I designed the first iterations of the rig parts, including stats, as well as missile launchers that actually animated when firing. Around this time, I did one of several redesigns of the mech's movement animations, and I also began experimenting with a comic book-inspired art style, but I ended up scrapping it eventually when I just couldn't fix some graphical bugs. I also added energy weapons, shoulder guns, part generation, item pickups, melee weapons, and more. Now that there was stuff to do in the game, I started to get into the garage side of things. I added the first iteration of the customization menu. For a while it was a shared part and color customization area, but I separated it eventually. This was also about when I decided to add backpacks as a part type to my game, which worked out because this was about when I realized that my first rig designs were not good. To paraphrase a friend of mine, they needed more main character energy. So, 3 months into development, I started working on new mech designs. They've been tweaked and updated over time, but these sets are still in the game now. At this point, my ADHD was starting to tell me I needed to create some actual levels. I was getting bored of the test map, and too many of my friends and family were asking me if the plain white boxes were final. I don't know if I should have been a little offended that they thought I might go with plain white boxes for the buildings in my game or not, but I appreciate their tact regardless. Anyway, at this point, I started working on making assets for real levels. What were those assets, you may ask? They were basically plain white boxes. Don't at me. Anyway, they were created with my initial intention for the game, that it be set in a megastructure inspired by Blame, or Blam, if you're someone who pronounces it like that. It still is set in a setting like that, but I think that my art style has improved a bit these days. At this point, I also started working on various gameplay mechanics. The mod system, the transporter to take the player between stages, etc. I also worked on improving my abilities with level design. My first level was basically a parking garage, so you might say I'm a misunderstood genius. Or maybe you won't, but you probably should. It was around this time, about 5 months in, that I started putting together my announcement trailer. But Sage, you may say, you didn't announce the game until 9 months in. You are correct, but please stop interrupting me. I've got a really good flow going here. Anyway, I made my first announcement trailer and everyone was pretty positive about it. However, I also submitted it to be roasted by the guys over at Bite Me Games, and they didn't love it. They said the lighting was bad, the music was bad, the font sucked, and I couldn't read good neither. Okay, maybe not that last part, but bear with me. For what it's worth, I credit these guys with saving my game's announcement. At this point, I got help from a friendly dev from that community who helped me start working my way toward the PS1 art style I'd been inching toward without committing to. I also realized that I needed to work harder to flex my artistic muscles with the game's presentation. I made all sorts of under-the-hood changes and totally started fresh with my level designs. I'm much happier with where they've ended up. Sometimes you're just too close to really see the flaws in what you've created. Around this time, I was also taking a look at my gameplay in general. I realized that my game had a major flaw. Even though I had this awesome movement and combat system, the player could pretty much win every fight by just strafing to the side and dodging if missiles got too close. I watched a video from Jonas Tyroller about making your game more fun, and I realized that I needed to include some sort of reason for players to use the awesome movement system I'd made. At this point, I realized that I should take some influence from bullet hell games. I played 102 minutes of Returnal for inspiration, and then I was off. The system helped a lot, but it did mean that I had to implement some optimization, so at this point I added pooling for projectiles. Basically, every bullet gets spawned at the start of each level and then just gets reused after it'd normally be destroyed. I eventually added something similar for enemies. At some point here, I got into a rougher patch. Life became quite busy and slowed development. I also had a big pile of technical issues that had me worrying for about a month whether I had to totally restart. In short, if you're working in Unreal, don't change your structs unless you hate your projects and love restarting. I did figure it out eventually though, so everything worked out. So, now we're here. I've announced the game, it had a massive post on the Mecha subreddit, and the YouTube channel has picked up some nice traction. As of writing, I've just passed 600 wishlists about a week after announcing the game, and I couldn't be more thrilled at the reception the game has had. My time is still pretty limited, but I'm working hard on adding some much-needed features, including settings, achievements, lore logs, meta progression, bug fixes, and additional content. I don't have an ETA on when exactly I'll have all of that done, but selfishly, I'd love to have it ready before Monster Hunter Wilds comes out. However, I don't think that'll happen. If you're interested in being part of initial playtesting, you should sign up for the playtest from the Steam store page. I'll be starting with a limited playtest so I can keep up with feedback, but eventually it'll be open so that everybody can try it out while I work on getting a polished demo put together. Just keep in mind that the game is still in development and I'm a first-time dev, so there will likely be some issues. I just ask for your patience as I work through this part of the process. If you're excited about this game like I am, then I'd love it if you'd wishlist the game on Steam and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Both help me out a lot with getting the word out. I've also got a Discord that I'd love for you to join, where I'll have more frequent updates and you'll have a direct line to tell me what you love and hate about the game as it is. I'll be trying to get devlogs out around once a week here if possible, though the main priority is getting the game ready, so that may not always work out. Anyway, if you've made it this far, I truly appreciate your support and your attention. It means the world, and I do not take it for granted. I'll see you next time.